Welcome to today's event. My name is Robert Dykes. I'm the Fukui chapter president. So this event is brought to you by Fukui chapter and Material Writers SIG, which are JALT groups. So this is the second interview, part two of an interview series for people in the graded reader industry. A couple months ago, I interviewed Andy Boone, who's written over 20 graded readers here in Japan. He's been an editor for more than 30 and counting. And today we're changing gears a little, and we're going to interview Paul Goldberg, who's founder and president of a massive online readed library and LMS system called Xreading.com. And now I'd like to introduce Paul Goldberg. So this is Paul Goldberg. Here's a short bio. Hopefully I get it right. Please correct me if I get anything wrong. So he has a master's in science and secondary education, a master's in arts in TESOL. He completed the coursework for a doctorate in education in TESOL. He's taught English as a foreign language in Venezuela, Spain, Korea, and the US, most recently at the Kwansei Gakuen University in Japan. And he's been in Japan for 16 years. So please, everybody, give a round of applause for Paul Goldberg. Yep.
Happy so many people have showed up here on a Saturday. That's great.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. So just before we get started, there was a sign-up sheet, and I had people add questions if they wanted to. I've integrated those questions into the interview. I will try to give you credit when they come up. Some people had their names, some people were anonymous. So I'll do my best to add those questions. So before we jump into Xreading, which is Paul's bread and butter, the main reason I think a lot of us are here, I want to ask some generalized questions to Paul. To start, in your own words, can you tell us what is a graded reader?
A graded reader is a book intended for language learners that is originally were retold classics simplified, and more recently original stories. The key thing is they're written with controlled vocabulary and controlled grammar. So they're not just simple books like a children's book, but they're actually thoughtfully created to help language learners build up their language ability.
Okay, thank you. Can you, in your own words, explain or define what is extensive reading and intensive reading? Because I know you give presentations on extensive reading a lot, and a lot of people they consider graded reading extensive reading. So what is the difference between intensive and extensive?
Okay, thankfully, I just watched a 2-hour lecture by Rob Waring this morning, so I now know the difference. I mean, the main difference is, I believe, is, well, first of all, what is extensive reading? Extensive reading goes back to, extensive reading has existed for a long time. I mean, people in the 1930s, Harold Palmer, and of course, I can't think of his other name, the guy who came up with the General Service List, developed ideas of extensive reading, but it really became popular with Stephen Krashen's idea of comprehensible input. To learn a language or to acquire a language, you need to have a massive amounts of comprehensible input. And that's kind of like the foundation of extensive reading, is that students need to be reading a lot, but they also need to be comprehending it. And that's what extensive reading is. So in other words, they have to read a lot, as I just said, and they have to be understanding. And that's kind of where graded readers fit in, is that graded readers, because they are written with limited vocabulary and grammar, students can read them easily. And because there's a lot of them, and you can see, behind me, you see a whole shelf of them, that's where extensive reading comes from. The main principles are, and then Richard Day wrote his well-known 10 principles. Students should be choosing what they want. They should be reading a lot. The emphasis is on fluency, things like that, which is opposed to intensive reading, which really the best way to describe intensive reading is reading to learn the language, as in studying the vocabulary, studying the grammar in those sentences, where extensive reading is more reading for the meaning of the text, but acquiring the language because you're reading so much. And I think students do need to have a combination of both.
So can we use, usually I always see like graded readers paired with extensive reading. Can we use graded readers for intensive reading, or does anybody use them for intensive reading?
Absolutely, yes. So that's a very, very good question. It's graded readers do not equal extensive reading. Graded readers are a tool that extensive reading can be done with, but that doesn't mean when they're being used, extensive reading is being done. You know, like for example, a hammer is a tool for hitting a nail, right? But you can also use a hammer to keep your door open. That doesn't mean it's being used as a hammer.
So I see.
I like that one. I just came up with it. But I'm always trying to think of a good analogy. So I've met so many in my quest to get every school in the world to do extensive reading, hopefully with Xreading. I have discovered that there's many schools I go to where they will tell me, oh yeah, we have an extensive reading program. We've had it for years. And they say, you know, we have graded readers and our students will read 2 graded readers every semester. And I think, well, that's great. You do have graded readers. It is hopefully comprehensible, although it depends on what level they're using, but that would not be extensive reading by a long shot because they're not getting the comprehensible input, enough of it to make any real difference. And if the graded reader is of a difficulty level, a high difficulty level, then they're just doing intensive reading. Nothing wrong with that at all, but that's just not extensive reading. It's using the graded readers for intensive reading.
So do you, when I look at conferences or even journals, I see such a focus on extensive reading, presentations and articles. Is that because intensive reading that's kind of what we've been doing for 60 years anyway, and extensive is extra, or yeah.
Again, another very good question. Yeah, I think a lot of it is pushback against the long tradition of intensive reading. Especially in Japan, where we're based, is that the entire education system here for language learning for generations was based on intensive reading. Or, you know, that I will teach my students the vocabulary, I'll teach them the grammar, I'll teach them pronunciation, and then they'll learn the language. And that's just not how it works. The analogy, I'm sure everybody who's ever seen me present on Xreading that I've given is on tennis, because it's such an easy, clear analogy. If somebody practices the skills of tennis, if I as a teacher teach my students the skills of tennis, serving, forehand, backhand, footwork, all those things, just because I've taught them those skills and maybe even they've practiced those skills in isolation, they're not actually going to become a good tennis player. They need to actually get on a court with somebody and start playing and putting, not only using the skills, but using them in combination, in unexpected combinations as well. And that's what extensive reading is doing. So I think after years of just teachers teaching the grammar and vocabulary, there's been a movement now, this is about 20 years now, realizing that students need more than that. They need to actually learn, use the language in a meaningful way. Ideally, go abroad. Then you're going to be using it every day. But the reality is most students cannot go abroad. And therefore, in Japan, probably the best way to use the language in a meaningful way is going to be with extensive reading.
So I have 3 questions from the audience that I want to get to before we get to Xreading. This is a really good question. What is your take on phonetics versus whole word reading?
Okay. I'm really sorry, but I don't know.
Okay. That's okay. We don't know. I mean, yeah, we don't all know everything.
I should know, but I've never, that's something when I was studying in the US was a big debate. And then I went overseas and I kind of lost track of what, I have a general concept, but I'm not in any position to give an educated or even semi-educated answer. So sorry, I have to pass on that one.
Like what they're asking, like say we have a compound kanji word. Should we just know how to say that kanji when we see it? Or should we know that this kanji is this sound and this kanji is that sound? So that's a really interesting question that I had never thought about before.
Okay, I hope I do better than the next 2 that you have.
All right, so Raquel, I hope I don't get this name wrong. Raquel Taniguchi asks, can this extensive reading, I guess what you're talking about, be used for high school students?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
High school, junior high school. I would say that students do have to have a foundation. A student cannot start doing extensive reading from the first day they start learning a language. But even in junior high school, and in fact, I know there's some people in this presentation right now watching, I think they're still here, who are using it in junior high schools. And, they have to start with the really simple books. And for some students, it won't be pure extensive reading because they will be having challenges even with the very simple books. When I say simple, I mean one sentence on a page.
Yeah.
Of pretty basic language. Students will, of course, if they're brand new to learning English, might find that challenging. But at least they're engaging with the story, not just learning word lists or filling in words in sentences like close exercises. At least they're approximating reading a book. And I think that's really, really, really important. So yes, I think it could be used by any students as long as they have a limited, at least 50 words, 100-word vocabulary.
And I guess to follow up, so someone asked, how can we make extensive reading more enticing for junior high students? So just really easy, one sentence per page books?
Yeah, very simple. I'm not sure if we're going to talk about this later. I think one of the benefits of extensive reading is students enjoy it. I think one of the fallacies of extensive reading is students enjoy it. What I mean is there are a lot of teachers out there who have what's the word about something, they drank the Kool-Aid, and they learned about extensive reading. They learn about how much students will enjoy. They read about it, hear about it in a presentation. But the reality is, I think it's relative. Okay, again, anybody who's seen me present, I often give this example. Extensive reading is hopefully more enjoyable than doing close exercises. It's more enjoyable than doing grammar trees. It's not really ever going to be as enjoyable as a day at Tokyo Disneyland.
Sure.
So the idea that, yes, it can be enjoyable for students, but they're not going to fall in love with it. That is the job of the teacher. And in fact, before the pandemic hit, Tom Robb and I were putting together a kind of a guide for teachers who we had noticed were implementing extensive reading programs and disappointed it wasn't as successful as they wanted. And from our discussion with these teachers, it was simply that they had the idea that I mentioned a moment ago, that they would bring really nice books to their students would get so excited, start reading, and fall in love with reading. It just, unfortunately, maybe 5% of students that will happen, and the other 95, the teacher has to find ways extrinsically. Sure. I wish I could say students will all be intrinsically motivated to read.
I mean, even in your native language, what is it? 10% of college graduates read a book. There's some crazy statistic like 60% of college graduates never read another novel or something like that. So, I mean, even in your native language, some people just don't enjoy reading anymore.
Yeah, or people, like I love reading, but I just don't do it because I'm busy. I read, but I read the news every day, and that's kind of extensive reading. I am reading. I'm just not sitting down and reading a novel.
Sure. Yeah. It's taking me it takes me 4 or 5 months to finish a novel. So yeah, I mean, anyway. All right. So the meat and potatoes, let's get to Xreading. So some of us might not know what Xreading is, and I want you to give us a 2 to 3 sentence commercial of what is Xreading.
Okay. Well, who am I talking? I'm for language teachers or non-language teachers, because I have a different definition. So for language teachers, I think most of us are, it's very simple. It's a digital library of graded readers, and we now hopefully all know what graded readers are. It's a digital library of graded readers connected to a learner management system that lets teachers monitor everything their students are doing. And that's really what it is. I mean, to people who don't know, like to my relatives, I usually who have no idea what a graded reader or even English teaching is, I generally say, it's kind of like Netflix with books.
For books, okay.
But not as cool.
Sure.
And that's probably the best way to describe it.
Okay.
It's a pretty simple thing. It's not really rocket science. It just, it's a library of books and a way for teachers to check what their students are doing.
That would be the LMS part, right?
Yeah, LMS, Learner Management System. Just in case someone's not familiar, like Moodle, Blackboard, Google Teams, or Google Microsoft
Classroom, I think it's called.
Yeah.
So when did Xreading officially start? 2014? 20.
That's a complicated question. So Xreading actually was 3 different ideas that came together.
So I guess
And
that's my question is what led, like, let's say it's about 10 years old. What led you to start Xreading, or why did you create Xreading?
okay. So Xreading, yeah, actually has 3 origins. The first, and a lot of it came from where I was doing my doctoral degree at Temple University. And I got interested in extensive reading. Actually, even before that, I kind of had the concept that extensive reading, before knowing the term extensive reading, I just believe students should be reading easy material. However, at that time, I didn't know about graded readers. I should say this was before I came to Japan. I used to teach English education majors, and I would tell them, when you're teaching your students to read, give them very, very simple material. But I didn't actually know graded readers existed, which made it a little bit difficult if they asked me what they should read, because I didn't know.
Yeah.
When I came to Japan, I was introduced to graded readers, and I thought, and the idea of extensive reading, which actually matched what I had already believed in. And I had teachers telling me, yes, I just give my students books and they read. And I was skeptical. And I said, as a student, I don't think I would read if the teacher just said read and then, just write down how many words or how many books you read, and I'll give you a grade. Yeah, I guess there's some students who'll be really honest. I don't know if I would be one of them. So I thought, well, you know what, we should have some quizzes or some way of assessing if students have actually read the book. And the orthodoxy at that time would be like, no, you can't give quizzes. Because if you give quizzes, students are going to be demotivated and they're going to start to hate reading. And I thought, when I was a kid, we had a library just a few miles from my house. My mom would take me there. My parents would take me there every weekend. I'd get a stack of books, and we'd come back the next week, and the librarian would give us a simple quiz. Just ask us like 5 or 6 questions. Very, very simple. And if you answered, you got a gold star. And the idea was to see how many gold stars you could get during the summer vacation. And I thought, you know what? That was actually really motivating to me. I want to get those gold stars. You know what I could do with those gold stars? Nothing at all. But I just wanted to. Yeah. And so I thought to myself, well, I don't know. I was, maybe 6 or 7 years old. Japanese university students, I don't know how different. So I imagine that they would be motivated if the quiz was simple, not tricky, not challenging, because it would let them show everybody, or at least show their teacher, hey, look, I did read this book. And if they hadn't read the book, I don't think they'd get angry at the quiz. They didn't realize, hey, I didn't read the book, so I don't deserve credit for it. They wouldn't be demotivated because of the quiz. And that was my first project. I decided to write quizzes for graded readers. It went very well. This is a research project. I have to thank David Begler, who at Temple University, who gave the project that we had to do, that I created the quizzes for. And I said it went very well. But the way I did extensive reading is I brought the books to class. And therefore, I knew which book students had, and therefore I could prepare the quiz for the next week. A lot of my coworkers heard about these quizzes. They thought it was a great idea. They tried using the quizzes, but they didn't know which books their students had because they were getting them from the library. And they were having they were spending more time in class handing out the quizzes, figuring out who got which quiz, than they wanted to. Then, it took up like 10 or 15 minutes of class just to hand out the quiz. So that came up with the idea, wouldn't an online system be better? And that was about 2007, actually. And we called that, so we called that maybe 2008. The friend of mine who was helping me, because again, I'm not a tech person whatsoever. My friend who had the idea of making a website for it, he looked for a URL. We had all these, great names, the Extensive Reading Project or whatever, but the only URL we could find was Xreading. So we just went with that. I did not plan on that being the name. And that is where Xreading first came from. And as you know, there's another website for quizzes.
Yeah, MReader.
MReader.
Yeah. So which came first?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So they were about the same time. So I was working on my doctoral degree, writing quizzes, writing papers. And one day I'm sitting at my desk writing a paper about extensive reading for class. And I get a call from the Oxford rep who says, "Oh, I'm at a conference in Fukuoka, and there's a gentleman here. He's also writing quizzes for graded readers."
Thomas Robb, right?
Yeah, and I said, "Well, what's the person's name?" She says, "Tom Robb." And literally at that moment, on my lap was his article from 1989 about extensive reading, because I was again working on a paper. I was like, Tom Robb, as in like, I think it's Robin Susser is the name. There's a famous article, one of the earliest. And yeah, so she puts me on the phone with him. And I was like, wow, I'm actually writing about your article right now. And turns out we're both writing quizzes for graded readers. And I was like, wow, if you ever come to Osaka, please let me know. He's like, oh, actually, I live in Osaka. I said, oh, okay. Well, sometimes I go into Osaka. I said, actually, I live outside Osaka. I live in a place called Hidakata. He says, oh, I live in Hidakata also. Turns out we lived basically at almost walking distance from each other. And
so, they both like M reading is how do you say, open source quizzes, right? People user submitted questions, if I understand correctly. And I think I heard you say that the quizzes on Xreading are not the same as the quizzes on M reading.
Yep. And that's kind of the next part of the story. So he invited me to his house and we said, yes, let's work together. I said, I've written about 150 quizzes for graded readers, and he had written about 150 quizzes for graded readers. We said, perfect, we'll have 300 quizzes. And we looked at each other's lists and they were almost identical. Oh, that didn't work. Then we discussed what we wanted to do. I wanted a very closed system. I was writing the quizzes, and it was kind of a labor of love. I would really crafted the quiz to be as good as possible because I did not want difficult questions. His idea, and I was controlling the book, so it wasn't that important for me. He was thinking of a system that could be used much wider, students going to the library, and therefore he wanted to have volunteers write quizzes. I wanted only 5 questions for the quizzes because, again, I didn't want difficult questions. Most graded readers don't have a lot of interesting points. He was more concerned with cheating at that time, and he wanted a bank of 20 questions. And I thought, well, I don't need 20 questions for my system because the teacher's are actually giving the quiz in class, printing it and giving it to the students. So we ended up not working together. And that's why. So his system, which was free and getting lots of volunteers to write quizzes, grew much more than Xreading did. So we both had 150 quizzes initially. Then I think, we met 6 months later. I had 200, he had 300. Then I had 250, he had 500. And yeah, it became pretty apparent that what he was doing was a lot more successful. So we were actually competitors for a little while, but now we're actually working together again.
So on Xreading, you have a list of consultants.
Yep.
And yeah, so I want to, like, Tom Robb is one of the consultants for Xreading. So what, like, he does M reading, and so you have different quizzes. How exactly, like, what does he consult with, or how does he help Xreading then, since he has his own system?
Okay, so first of all, Tom is just such a wealth of information, and I so much respect everything he's done. Even when we were kind of competitors, he would always support me. And M-Reader is a free system, so he doesn't have a financial stake in it. But he had always said, even when he had M-Reader, when he was very involved with M-Reader, he'd always say, yes, M-Reader is great, but it'd be even better if we could actually monitor what students were doing when they have the book open. That is the best way. And so when I created Xreading, he was actually quite pleased to see that. Xreading, actually, you can check students' reading speed. You can see how much they're reading. But more importantly, there were schools that wanted, that schools, like, for example, Guma University, I think there's people from Guma right here, who already had a huge extensive reading program set up with tens of thousands of books in their library. Even with that many books, Xreading actually gives a lot more because every student can access 1,000 graded readers. The point is, schools like Guma didn't want to just give up their physical library that has many books that are not in Xreading. So the idea was, if we could integrate M-Reader into Xreading, students could choose either book. So in other words, when a student goes to Xreading, depending on how the teacher sets it up, they can either choose a digital book, which is what most students do, but at some universities, they have the option to do a digital book or a physical book. And how do we evaluate if a student has read a physical book? Well, we've integrated the M-Reader quizzes into Xreading. So if they read a physical book in Xreading, so the student doesn't know they're going to M-Reader, but in Xreading, if they've read a physical book, they will be taken to a quiz from M-Reader. So that's why we're working together. And the fact that he's just such, he's so knowledgeable about online technology. I mean, he's been doing this stuff, for 30 years or longer, online, education. So he's been a great person to work with.
Here I'm looking at M-Reader has over 100,000 registered users.
Yeah.
Wow. So you have other consultants, Rob Waring, Willie Rendanya, Charlie Brown. What do like I think most of us here probably heard of Rob Waring. Like what exactly does he do or help you with, or what's his consulting?
Oh, I could go on for hours, especially about Rob. Rob and I work closely together. He in my opinion, is the world expert on extensive reading. Obviously Richard Day wrote the book literally on what is extensive reading, but Rob Waring has been so involved in promoting extensive reading, writing graded readers, editing graded readers, a founding member of the ER Foundation. He goes on road shows around mostly Southeast Asia, promoting extensive reading, full of ideas. He created what's probably the standard system for leveling graded readers. And so there's just so many different things we're working on. I mean, currently we're working on, I think we'll talk about this later, having independent authors submit books to Xreading. And so I'm working with Rob because he's a professional editor, things like that.
So I know, like you just mentioned ratings, and you have so many publishers, and all the publishers have their own ratings. And I believe you have your own internal Xreading ratings. So they're not like, I don't have to memorize everybody's ratings. I can go to Xreading, and level 0 is level 0. So is that based on like Rob Waring or you, or
100% Rob Waring. So Rob Waring created a system based on headwords and pretty much gave it to the ER Foundation. I mean, there wasn't much he could do with it. He gave it to so that's now called the ERF level scale. And Xreading just copied that. So they have, I think, different names. They call it early beginner, mid beginner, high beginner. We just call it 3, 4, 5. But it's the same. It's the same levels.
We're jumping around a little. Let me try to find. Okay, so in 2020, I believe you kind of relaunched Xreading.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? Now it's now called Xreading VL.
Okay, well, let me go back to, if you don't mind, I'll go back to the quiz website that I made.
Sure.
So I had the quiz website that was not really going anywhere, but for another project from Temple University, I created an extensive listening project. I was teaching a listening class, and it was just very difficult to do extensive listening because of students' lack of CD players. So I came up with an idea of really something just like Xreading, a library of books. And this was right before smartphones came out. So I imagine students using it on the computer. I kind of guessed the publishers would never let me put their books on Xreading, but they were willing to let me put the audio online, I should say. There was no real Xreading at that time. Xreading was just a quiz website. So I built this online listening website. Again, very similar to Xreading, a library, choose a book, but you can only listen to it. So I actually had 2 websites. Then I started getting metadata about graded readers. I thought many teachers don't know about the graded readers. What are the levels, the authors, which are the better books? And that was a 3rd project. So I had these 3 projects, and at one point I kind of got the inspiration to combine them into one, Xreading. However, Xreading had been pretty much a very unknown but still existing quiz website. So to distinguish Xreading, the quiz website, from the current Xreading, I decided to call virtual library. So that's really the only reason. And I actually don't use the VL very much anymore. But it was just to distinguish from teachers who thought, wait a minute, what's Xreading? You know, Xreading is something new. No, I've been using it for a couple of years with these quizzes. I wanted them to realize, no, this is something different. That's why I call it VL, a virtual library.
Okay. I was wondering, because if you go to the about, if you read, about Xreading VL, and I was like, VL, what is VL? Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, pages like that, I think I put together in 2014 when I created the website, and I've never looked back at them, so I probably need to update it a little bit.
Okay. So Xreading VL is not the 2020. It's actually a holdover from quite a while ago.
Yeah, that in 2014 when we launched the Xreading,
Okay.
it was, yeah.
So in 2020, you launched a new version, or
yes.
I don't know, how do you want to put it? You relaunched Xreading, or is it version 2.0, or?
Okay, so a little bit more of the origin of Xreading. So I had this idea for Xreading, a digital library of graded readers. Students, teachers could manage everything and monitor everything their students were doing. But I was lacking one thing, one very important thing: books. Oh, also I was lacking a website. So basically, all I had was an idea. And I knew that the website could be built. I had a friend of mine who was an accomplished web developer. He said, yes, we can definitely do this. But it's not going to really be very much fun if you don't have some books. And I went to the publishers. I'd known the publishers because they were helping me with the quizzes, giving me books or support. So I went to every publisher, and pretty much every publisher said the same thing to me. This is a great idea. This is the way of the future. Yeah, we love what you're doing. And I would say, good, so you're going to license your books to me? And they'd all say no. And they had reason. One reason was piracy. They didn't want their books up, online because they thought they'd be pirated, even though I could show them at that time in 2012, basically, that every one of their books was available online somewhere if you searched for it. Then they would tell me, you know what, we don't want our books together with other publishers. Every publisher would say, we are the best. Oxford, Cambridge, Macmillan said, we're special. We don't want to be sharing a platform. And I said, I went to them again with a picture from the library. I said, all your books are on the same shelves in every library and every bookstore. What do you mean you don't want them together? So they kind of admitted that was not much of an argument. And the biggest concern, though, was cannibalization of sales. They said, if we put it online, then people will stop buying the physical books. And I actually spent 6 months doing research and realized that the biggest users of graded readers are university students who basically never buy a graded reader.
Right. The
library buys them.
They rent that one, yeah.
Yep, exactly. And I went to the several university libraries, got the data. Luckily in Japan, they still put a stamp at the back of the graded reader. And I was showing I kept going back to the publishers up in Tokyo and showing, here, look, this is a graded reader. This is a little princess. It was bought 7 years ago by the library. It's been read by 110 students. Yeah, good job with that, 660 yen you made for all those students. So yeah, I kept persuading, pushing and pushing and pushing. I actually made 11 trips to Tokyo. And for those of you in Japan, going up to Tokyo, from Osaka, it's about Goman yen round trip, especially with a hotel, trying to persuade the publishers. And it kept getting closer and closer. And every publisher would say the same thing to me, which was, sorry, Paul, we know it's a great idea. It's the way of the future, but I love it, but my boss in the UK or the US won't agree. And they'd always say this in a very low voice: if you get another publisher to say yes, call us immediately. And I kept getting closer and closer. And finally, Macmillan, and I'm always thankful for Dallin Halliday, who now has his own company, a publishing company. He agreed, and within 48 hours, Cengage was on board, and within a couple of months, Oxford and Cambridge.
Who was the first? Say that again.
The one, nobody wanted to be first, but nobody wanted to be left out. And yeah, so that's that. So back to your question though about 2020. So when I started, one of the conditions the publishers gave me was, Paul, you have a great idea. we think you're a stand-up kind of guy. We know you're teaching at university, you're doing research on extensive reading, but we also are pretty sure you don't know anything about technology and you don't know anything about business. So why would we license our books to you? You don't even have a website. So one of the conditions was I actually had to build a website before any publisher had signed on. Therefore, as you might imagine, I outsourced, and I found the cheapest but still competent web developers I could find. And they built the website. And that was the original Xreading, but it was built very cheaply by developers who didn't really know what they were doing. Not their fault, but websites kind of develop organically. And things changed, and the foundation they had built, the language they built it in, the framework they used weren't really suitable for large numbers. And we had lots of problems. I don't know who's actually still watching right now, but anybody who used Xreading in the first couple of years, I'm really grateful for you sticking with it because it was really, really buggy. But as we grew and it became apparent this was going to be successful, I realized we needed to, you can only improve a website so much. At some point, you have to totally rebuild it. The best example I can give or analogy is if you build a house and you make a foundation and you build up one floor, you can probably add 2 more floors. But if you want to put a 10-story building there, you can't just keep adding to that house. You're going to have to tear down the house, put a stronger foundation, and rebuild. And that's basically what we did in 2020, which turned out to be pretty good timing because obviously with the pandemic, usage increased even more than we projected.
Are there any specific changes that were made that you can point out quickly to us?
No, the biggest thing I can point out is we didn't make any changes. We basically, most teachers didn't even know, they knew we had done something, but we kept everything identical because one of the, I think, keys to Xreading success is it's very simple to use. There's a classes page, assignments and students. You add your classes, you add your assignments, you add your students, and we didn't want any of that to change. We didn't want the buttons to change. So we made a really concerted effort to make the new version as similar to the old version as possible, just working a lot better, faster, things like that.
Now, I hope you're not mad that I bring this up because privately you told me it was really stressful, the change or the launching of the new website. Can you share, do you mind sharing what was so difficult about it?
Okay. Oh yeah, absolutely. No, it was the most professionally, the most stressful time I've ever had. I mean, I'd say if I had hair, I would have lost it. It was so with web development, even with my old developers who are mediocre and my new ones who are much better, there's always delays. And part of it is just because they would build something and it wouldn't be exactly what I wanted, or they build something and I realized, oh, that's just what I wanted, but we could make it better. But it was delayed. It was supposed to launch in time for the 2020 school year. But our backup plan was if we can't launch it before the school year, we can do it in August during the vacation period. I should say we have users all over the world, but the vast majority are in Japan, and even everywhere around the world is pretty much on vacation in August. So that was our backup plan. And it became apparent as we got closer that we were going to have to go with our backup plan. Then because of the pandemic, the number of users increased so much. And I really don't want to say no to anybody. Even we decreased the price. People say I'm greedy, and that they're entitled to that opinion. But we decreased the price, because I knew so many schools had an extensive reading program that if classes were online, they would have to. They just couldn't do extensive reading, full stop. So I didn't want to turn anybody away. So we probably let more people use the system. It became slower and slower, and it became apparent that the old system wasn't going to make it until August. My web developers assured me that, if you wait until June, we'll be ready. It will take us about 24 to 48 hours. We have to go down. It's not just like updating a website. We're actually migrating everything to the new site, and it will be smooth. Don't worry about it.
It wasn't smooth.
No, it turned out it took about 72 hours before the site even came up in the middle of the semester. And yeah, it was about as smooth as sandpaper, wrapped
Mm.
in barbed wire, dipped in shards of broken glass.
Ouch.
That's the best way to put it. It was I shouldn't say any bad words because this is being recorded. It was a cluster, and you can put the second word onto that expression. It was just horrible, and yeah, they just weren't ready. They you know, these developers have really have come through, but at that time they were overwhelmed themselves. They were dealing with the pandemic. The lead on the project, his father had COVID, so he wasn't there taking the lead. And they you know, they just didn't, they had been testing it with a much smaller number of users and it was going well. They just didn't realize the high number of users was going to crash it. And I was panicked because I thought, this is my first project with these guys. Maybe they really don't know what they're doing. You know, I had chosen them because they were highly recommended by some people in Japan who had used them before. But I thought maybe they fooled these people. Maybe they really don't know what they're doing. And it did take about a month before we were really moving smoothly. So it was a very difficult time. But I think most people, you know, everybody stuck with it. I think in some cases because they had no choice.
Yeah.
But in the end, I think everybody was satisfied. I was panicked that, you know, I spent a tremendous amount of money on this new version and everybody's going to quit come next April. And really, it had no effect. It happened, fortunately, far enough away from the decision-making process for 2021 that we were able to get by.
That's good. So you mentioned like a high number of users, and I understand if you don't want to share that information. Can you tell us like how many students and how many teachers?
I generally, it is a little bit confidential. I'd say
That's fine.
between and now sometimes I don't know the exact number because I don't actually follow every school what they're doing, but somewhere between 50 and 100,000 users would be, I'd say. I do know, I just checked recently, we have about 400 institutions using the system, but that could be like an entire
teacher or
yeah, it
10,
could be one
okay.
entire institution, or it could be one teacher and 3 students.
Okay. So also talking about numbers, maybe the new website answers this question, but so I found some articles and I found some numbers doing some Google sleuthing. In 2014, Xreading had 400 books. It took you almost 3 years to get to 600. So like it was a pretty slow climb. And then by 2020, I think today, you have double that. You have 1,350. So was that just like the cascading effect that more publishers were like, hey, this works. I want to get on board now? Or why, you know, it seemed like you had a nice logarithmic increase in book numbers.
You know, it was actually somewhat by design. Part of it was getting more publishers, but I already had the main publishers who I wanted. The only big publisher we never got was Pearson. And they still, and I wish they would add their books. But it was actually by design because I have to pay the publishers for every book. And if we increase the number of books at a higher rate than we increase the number of users, then I would be paying them less per book. So my goal was to always increase the number of books at about the same rate as we were increasing the number of users.
So do some publishers ask for a flat licensing fee, or is it based, or do they all base their contracts on number of users or number of reads?
The way Xreading works, we can't really give a flat fee. I guess we could, because we may do that for independent authors. That may be an option. But from when we started, the whole idea was, now I don't understand Bitcoin at all, but the whole idea of blockchain, it's supposed to be kind of like blockchain. There's no way for anybody to cheat. I was sharing the information with all the publishers. They knew how many books were in the system. They knew how many students were reading their books. And then they would get a percentage based on my agreement with the publishers, which is close to 50% of the total revenue would be split based on book usage. And it was basically the fairest way to do it. And you know, everybody except Oxford who pulled out was satisfied with that. And yeah, it continues to go that way. You know, the more often a book is read, the more revenue is generated for that publisher. The only thing we changed is we realized initially the shortest books we had were like starter level Oxford and Cambridge, but later we started adding really, really short books. Like, so Oxford and Cambridge, their shortest book is maybe 2,000 words.
Oh,
We
wow.
started
That's
adding
long.
books of like 50 words.
Yeah.
And those books were obviously a lot more popular among many students. So we had to tweak our formula, that we were then not only including how many times a book was read, but how many words were in that book to make it fairer. Otherwise, the very short books would be, sucking up all the revenue for the publishers.
So do the publishers have, like, how do you say, backdoor access to this information, or do you just have to regularly send them this information? Because you said it can't be cheated, or it's open. So yeah, how do you
Yes,
keep this
right now,
information?
actually, so I send a report every 6 months, which has become very complex because now it's for each country we have to do it differently because we get revenue. So Japan has one price, but I wanted to make extensive reading really, accessible everywhere in the world. So we, in Cambodia, it's much less than Japan.
You have
So
something,
I
what,
have
like 27 publishers, I think?
no, we have, I think, 17 publishers with 22 different series.
Yeah.
So for each book, I have to calculate the usage and then the revenue for that book, but I have to do it for each country now.
Wow.
Right now, it's still being done. So we still are planning on building a publisher portal so they can see in real time. But there's just, luckily the publishers have been understanding that there's been so many higher priority things to take care of that we haven't built that part. So I just send them a report every 6 months, and probably next year we'll move on to building the publisher portal.
So how much, so you have 17 publishers. How like, and you're making your own quizzes for these, and how many of them say, oh, I don't like that quiz, or do they just kind of hand you the book and they're hands off, or do you have some publishers that are more picky about what you're doing? Or
we just had an issue with that. It's funny. I would have said no problem, but we just had our first problem, and it was a good problem because they brought up a flaw. So interestingly, the bigger publishers were the hardest to get involved.
right.
Once they license their books, they really just leave me alone. They don't want anything. Smaller publishers like Marcos Benavides, if people know him with his Atami, their work is a labor of love. So if there's anything wrong, a typo or anything like that, they're going to let me know right away. Hey, Paul, there's something wrong, with our book in your system, and I have to, I'll take care of that as quickly as possible. With Macmillan, we had typos in some of the books since 2014 that only got pointed out recently. Some of them were pretty big, like an entire chapter was missing from one book. No one ever pointed it out. But like with Marcos, if there's one word wrong, he's going to tell us, which is good. We that's very helpful. So we recently added books from Waysgoose, a very small publisher. The owner is more well known than the publisher, Dorothy Zemak, who's been a plenary speaker at JALT. She's created a small publishing house supporting teachers who want to make materials. She gave us a bunch of books. We just added them last week. She wasn't happy about the levels that we gave them. And we told her, sorry, we've analyzed them and this is where they belong. And she said, no, our books, I feel my books are much easier than the books that they're ranked at the same level. And with Rob Waring, we went and we looked at like the Cambridge and Macmillan high-level books, and they should be at a higher level than they are. The publishers reported headwords for those books, which is how the ER Foundation system is based, is not accurate at all. So she was right. And it was a great, I was really embarrassed to admit that I didn't know that. But yeah, we're gonna re-level all of our books, although we're gonna wait until next winter, not do it in the middle of the semester.
So you have audio for many of your books, most of your books.
Good. If the publisher makes audio, we have it. If they don't make audio, we don't.
Oh, okay. So that was my question. The audio comes from the publisher.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Books that have audio tend to be more popular. So there's a great publisher from Shimane called I Talk, You Talk. I think she's British. I don't know. This woman has created her own series of graded readers. They're fantastic. But they didn't have audio, and I connected her to somebody who is now making audio for her books. So it's been great. Yeah, so it is better if the books have audio, but it's really up to the publisher.
So you would never bother with doing it in-house or paying for it yourself?
No, because there's too many books that, it's up to the publisher. If they don't want, then there's other. If I had only 100 books in Xreading, I would be doing everything I could to fix them, to make them better. But we just keep adding more.
I asked you about metadata, and you corrected me, and you said no. Like I was thinking about words per minute as metadata, but I think I'm thinking too much about the internet. You were saying no, metadata is author, book name, word like. So you have metadata, reading data, and usage data. I was going to ask about metadata, and you corrected me and said that you actually have three sets of data, what you call meta, reading, and usage data. Can you explain the difference between those three and who has access to, like what the students and teachers have access to?
Okay, so there's book metadata, which is the author, the number of words in the book, the minutes of the audio, things like that. There's reading data, which is how fast a student reads, how many words a student has read. And then there's usage data, which is kind of the same data, but what I give to the publishers. So one book has been read 500 times in the past 6 months. That's usage data. Does that
Do you
make
collect
sense?
stuff like how long the average person spends on a book? Is that possible to calculate?
Yeah, well, we know the average reading speed. We could
Reading,
find that out. There's a lot
yeah.
of metrics that we could find out if I had more time. And I probably should. I actually don't know how many minutes a student spends when they sit down and log into Xreading. I don't know how much time. I could find out, but I've never actually been able to, I've never spent the time to figure out what that would be, but it'd be very interesting.
And so, like,
I could also find out. I'll say I just there's so much data we could get, which might be helpful for research. In fact, that's one of the things I wish more teachers would use Xreading for research. There are actually quite a few using it for research right now, but there's so many things you could look into because of the data we collect. Teachers themselves, they can see we now have something called user logs, where a teacher can log in. Of course, they can see every book a student has read. But if you go to user logs, you can see every time the student pressed next in the book, or back, or used a chapter selector, or took the quiz. We've found it's actually very helpful to catch cheaters, but it's ideal for research as well. You can see, really what's happening with the students.
The last 15 minutes, we'll come back to the cheaters. I want to hear that story again.
Okay.
So do you, like, can you see, so you can see who hasn't, or you can see if a book hasn't been finished, if they haven't hit next on every page, in other words.
Yeah, so a teacher can easily see. I mean, first of all, for those who are not familiar with Xreading, we track how many words a student has read, but we also track their reading time, which allows us to track their reading speed. So therefore, if a student just flips through the book very quickly, they'll get flagged as having read, at a speed that's much too high. Most students are reading 100 to 150 words per minute. If a student flips through a book, and literally flips through a book like this, it will be 2,000 words per minute. It's very easy to catch.
Yeah. So you can see which books are read the most and read the least. Have any of the publishers been come to you and said, wow, we didn't have this data before, or are you sure this is right? This is a great book. No one's reading it. Or has there been any surprises with the data that you or the publishers or the teachers have pointed out?
One thing I discovered is the book ratings, as in the student-created ratings, have not been very helpful. Is anybody familiar with Tabelog? Tabelog is a website in Japan for finding good restaurants.
Right.
I used to love it, but I've discovered after over much time that pretty much every single restaurant in Japan is now between 3.2 and 3.5. And that's kind of what's happened to the Xreading reviews. Because there's books I know are great, and there's books I know are just really not good, but we put them there because the publisher, has given them to us as a set, and they have almost the same ratings. Therefore, we've changed from a 5-star rating, which I think many students just choose 3 because they can't be bothered, to a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And hopefully that will give us a bigger spread on which are the better books. We just implemented it, so I don't know yet. But that's been the biggest surprise with data.
I think there's a lot of rating systems, whether it's movies or TV, whatever you see online. a lot of places they were doing 10-point scales and they just went to, buy or not buy or watch or not watch, because it's so like the meta scores were not indicative of if it was good or not.
Yeah, as a rater, I personally want 5. I want to be able to show my feeling, but I realize that it doesn't. As a collector of data, you just get a mess.
Yeah. Let's see. So this was my question, and a couple people from the audience asked this. What are your future plans for Xreading? So where do you go from here?
Okay, I got it. Actually, this one I actually thought of, because I literally I can't emphasize enough how much I love creating Xreading. I think about it all the time. I'm constantly coming up with ideas. I have to write them down because otherwise I might forget. But I have like, oh, this is the best idea. This will be such an improvement. And if I don't write it down, I've actually 2 days later forget that idea. But I'm constantly coming up with things. So some of the things we have, like just coming really soon, is a speed reading component. Because Paul Nation, who's also, I didn't mention him before, he's one of my main mentors. He's actually, when I was in my doctoral degree, I had to decide continue or go with Xreading. And he said, you know what, you should probably go with Xreading, because if you don't, you'll regret it. So I'm always grateful for him to suggest that. But he's also been a big proponent of a dedicated speed reading program for students. Of course, extensive reading will help students improve their reading speed, but he says something where they're encouraged, read this short passage as fast as you can. So we're going to be adding a speed reading component. It was supposed to be done a month ago, but as I said before, there's always delays, but that's coming within a month.
I actually used some of his stuff in one of my bigger research projects, like Paul, reading for speed, and
I don't think when he gave me that suggestion, he realized that we'd be competing with his own books. Hopefully he won't mind. Now he's very, very supportive. We've added features to deal with the pandemic. For example, teachers can now make announcements to the students. They can do live monitoring. They can see exactly what their students are doing at any moment that they're on Xreading. Coming soon is chat, the ability just to send a message to a student instantly while you're using Xreading instead of having to send an email or something like that. Interactive dictionary, although I've been saying that since 2014, but it really is coming soon, where students can tap on a word and get the meaning, and that will get saved to their personal word list, and we'll create vocabulary learning games and activities for them. Interactive activities, we've started expanding outside of Japan, where more schools are using Xreading for intensive reading.
Okay.
And therefore, most graded readers have activities. In Japan, 95% of teachers ignore those activities. But in other countries, they want those activities because they're not really doing pure extensive reading. So right now, the teacher can download those pages, but that doesn't really make a lot of sense to have an online system where you have to download PDFs. So we'll be making those activities interactive. Also, tools for analyzing the vocabulary or the lexical makeup of graded readers for people doing vocabulary research. Which are the words that are most common? How many times will a student see a specific word if they read a specific set of books? Things like that, which will be very helpful in terms of learning how students learn vocabulary through reading.
And I think so you just gave a talk at PanSig, and someone asked the question again here. So it's been asked 2 or 3 times now. Do you have any plans to ramp up the volume of easier readers for low grade students?
They should have been in my office this morning, because that's exactly what I was doing. Sunshine Books. So we definitely, one of my ideas was to create an Xreading Junior eventually. And so we're trying to get more lower level books. The problem is there's not that many good ones. There's lots of books, very cute for young learners, but they have a lot of low frequency vocabulary words. That's one reason Oxford Reading Tree is actually really good. Despite being written for native speakers, the books are actually very accessible. Unfortunately, Oxford decided to take their books off of Xreading after 2 years to launch their own system, which is...
Do you want to get into that now or wait a bit?
Oh, I can wait if we have time. I'll just say, yeah, they have their own system and it's 4 times as expensive as Xreading.
Okay.
So I don't know how much it's being used by, I'm actually curious to find a single university using their system. But anyway.
We'll come back to that in the next question. So I asked you this, most of these questions you didn't know, they're cold. But this question I did ask you to think about. So I'm curious if you.
Well, so this morning I was going through Sunshine Books. Probably after Oxford Reading Tree is the best books I've seen written for native speaking children, but with very few low frequency words. So we already have about 75, and I'm adding another 100, 50 to 100. That's just what I was working on this morning. So yes, they are coming.
That's good. I think people will be excited about that because a lot of us have, very low level.
Yes, these are very, very simple books.
So still on the future of Xreading. This is what I asked you. One of the few questions I asked you outright before we got started. Because you're a business, you have to think about money, and I've heard you say before, and you've told me you're really busy. If money wasn't an issue and time wasn't an issue, you could just snap your fingers and add something to Xreading or do something for Xreading. What would your kind of dream feature be?
I thought about that because you mentioned that question, and one thing about Xreading, I never got outside investment. Everything I did, I did, and I'm very happy to build Xreading step by step. And all these plans I have for the future, I'm very happy to add one at a time. So really, I probably wouldn't change that much. But if I did, if I had more time, let's say more than money, I wish I had. I'd like to have a free version of Xreading for places where they just, even the cheap price, like in Cambodia, we charge less than half the price of Japan. That's still too expensive for the majority of students in Cambodia.
Yeah.
So I would like to be able to, but we can't charge less because the publishers wouldn't keep their books on the system. So it would be really nice if I had unlimited resources, if I could make my own series of graded readers and not have to pay that much, or had unlimited resources to pay the authors and make those for free. That's one thing I would do. The other thing is probably a native app, which is coming, but it's going to be a huge expense. So right now, to use Xreading, you have to have an internet connection, which in Japan is no problem at all. We have internet, even the subway, you have internet everywhere. But in some countries, internet is just not that widespread. And therefore, students want to download a book to their device and read it when they're offline. And that will require almost not quite as big as building the new version of Xreading, but it's going to be a major project to do that. So that's something I would like to do.
Excellent answer. Yeah. So if anybody wants to donate to the Xreading, what do you call it? Like, what's a good name for that? We'll have to think about that. Like, like charity Xreading for under, developing.
No, we don't. You know what we need though. What I would like, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head right now. This is an idea I've had before. Is I would like to create a system, a program that I've called, maybe this is somebody else's program already, Readers for Readers, where kind of like students in Japan could read and get like a telethon, where the more they read, somebody would donate money, but that money would then go to expanding Xreading or extensive reading in other places.
Yeah.
Aaron Campbell might be doing something like that at his university, but I'd like to do something like that more widespread, where students all over Japan, the more they read, whether it's themselves, their family, or corporate sponsors, will then donate money that will then be used to give free access.
Like a readathon, 10 yen per book or something at this institution. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've always had in the back of my mind, but just haven't had the time to develop it.
That's a great idea. So Oxford University Press Reading Club. Is this the only competition to Xreading? Is it your first competition? And how yeah, tell us about it. So
that was the most disappointing, because to me, when I first got involved with extensive reading, I said I brought a box of books to class. in 2004, it was Oxford, their bookworm series. So that to me is the gold standard. I do now think there actually are, I think Cambridge and Cengage make better books, but Oxford has a great series of books, and the Oxford Reading Tree, there's just nothing else like it. And it took me a long time to persuade them to put their books on Xreading. We finally had them, and then most publishers, I think, one reason Xreading has been successful, I think, is because at the end of the day, graded readers don't make a lot of money, the publishers. So they're willing to work with me because, like I said, the alternative is schools buying the books and putting them in their library and the publisher making very little money. So I think they also realize that, for the most part, most schools are not going to sign up for a single publisher's library. Because, yeah, anybody who's even moderately a proponent of real extensive reading knows that you can't do it with just one publisher. And the publishers realize it's impractical. But Oxford is big enough, and they decided. But it's more, in my opinion, and they may see this interview. So you know, I stand by my words. Oxford Reading Tree really is very special, especially for younger learners. And I think they're counting on language schools, in particular, spending ichiman yen, or $100 per student per year, where very few high schools and no university is going to do that. So it's really a shame, because I've had so many teachers tell me they feel like their students' access to the Oxford books was just ripped away from them, because for many schools, even before the pandemic, Xreading was their de facto library for extensive reading. And when Oxford took the books out, they said our students just no longer have access. You know, and Oxford told those schools, oh, you can sign up to our system. But again, teachers don't want to have one publisher's system, and two, it's going to be it is extremely expensive. So it's kind of disappointing. There are other systems, but again, they're more for native speakers. Scholastic has a system, Raz Kids. Xreading is really there is one for second language learners called Cosmopeer ebook, I think, or eStation, but it's very Japanese centric. They are geared toward the Japan market really only. In fact, I think their website is entirely in Japanese.
Oh, wow.
But besides that, Xreading really has no other competition, which I'm satisfied with.
Yeah, that's good. So the Q&A is going to go about 90 minutes. The last 15, I want you to tell the story of the cheating ring. I think people enjoy this. So I'm going to ask one or two more questions, and then I want you to get to the cheating cartel.
Okay.
So one reader, anonymous reader, had a really good question. So he asks, how much does Xreading offer institutional support? So what he means by that is, you have a company like Microsoft, and if we have MS Teams, or our institution uses Word or Office, and we have issues with it or problems with it, Microsoft just says, too bad. So what kind of training does Xreading have? Or if there's a problem, what kind of support can customers expect and users expect from Xreading?
I should probably learn from Microsoft. I like their approach. No, I think anybody who's using Xreading knows that. For me, first of all, the biggest challenge, there's been two huge challenges with Xreading that I didn't anticipate. I knew it would be trouble to get the publishers on board, and things like that. I knew it would be expensive to make the website. Two things I didn't count on was, once the website was built, I thought, okay, I'm done. I built my website. That was extremely expensive of my own money, but I'm done with that. I didn't realize that you're never done with a website. There's constantly, every single week, there's new things that need to be attended to with the website. I have meetings with my developers all day on Mondays, and throughout the rest of the week, I'm talking to them. I mean, sometimes it's just a browser changed something, and then Xreading isn't working on that browser, but we don't know what it is. We have to figure it out. That was one. The second one is the amount of tech support I have to provide, which I think is considering the number of users we have and the number of inquiries I get is pretty amazing. I get, once the semester is going, I get maybe 1 or 2 a day. But yeah, it's me providing the service, whether it's technical service of having a bug reported. More often it's a user created issue. You know, someone says, oh, there's a bug in Xreading, this is not working. And I look at it and I say, no, you've just done something that you're incorrectly. Yeah. And, you know, I think it's still a relatively, you know, like I said, we have 400 schools using Xreading. I know almost personally over half of the teachers running it at every school. They know they can reach me. I will get back to them generally within 24 hours. You know, at the beginning of the semester, it might take a little bit longer. But I try to support teachers, not only in technical issues, but how to get the most out of extensive reading. I consider myself, although I am a business owner, my background is in academics and especially with extensive reading. So I try to give sound advice on how to implement an extensive reading program successfully as much as possible.
So, I mean, I've flipped around Xreading a bit and I see, you know, you have PDF tutorials, which I guess that's enough of a tutorial for most users. I mean, people don't come to you like, I don't understand what to click here, right? Because you said keep things simple, I think, from the beginning. So I guess it's intuitive enough and simple enough, because, you know, MS Word changes every 6 months and it's like this button is now in a different submenu.
I just, from my observation, the amount of questions I get and the kind of questions I get, I think it is very, intuitive how to use it. You know, we've tried to make it. It has, admittedly, in web development, I've learned there's something called feature creep.
Yes.
Meaning that, you know, people, every week, in fact, just this past week, I got 2 suggestions for new features. And generally, you know, I will think, okay, yes, this is a great idea for you, but probably not anybody else. That's most of the suggestions I get. But sometimes it is a great idea, and then I try to incorporate it. But yeah, I have to figure out, can I integrate this without confusing users? And I think for the most part, we've done a pretty good job. Again, maybe people are scared to email me. Maybe they have questions that they're not asking, but assuming that most people, when they run into trouble, are contacting me because I'm the only person to contact, I think we get a very, very small number of inquiries, meaning teachers are figuring it out. On the other hand, I will admit that we do need video tutorials. I don't know if you're going that with the PDFs.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, did you want to do that, or did you have plans for that, or?
So when we first launched in 2014, I spent a tremendous amount of time and effort making some videos, and yet within a few months, they weren't really accurate anymore. And it's a lot more difficult to redo a whole video than it is to change one page of a tutorial. So I am looking into it again. I am looking actually to work with people, and this might be a good time to announce it. If anybody's looking to do some additional work, like a contract work, whether it's writing quizzes, writing graded readers, or helping me with the technical aspects of Xreading, you know, hunting down bugs, or chasing cheaters, like I think you're going to ask me about.
Yeah.
If anybody's interested in helping me, I definitely could use some assistance. You know, I have quite a few people helping me with different things. My web developers are one entity. I have a tech assistant advisor, Tom Rawson, who's one of my consultants. I do have a team of quiz writers right now, but I could always use more help. And, you know, especially if someone brings the right skills, would be appreciated.
Yeah, I heard, I mean, you keep saying that. Is Xreading really a one-person job? I mean, is it really all you? I hear you work 12 hours a day and it's like me, only you. You have no help other than—
That's not actually true. I do probably work about 14 hours a day. But I love it. I absolutely love, you know, I wake up in the morning excited. You know, obviously when we were going through the transition to the new system, it was extremely stressful, and I was probably working 20 hours a day. But I wake up every morning excited to do what I have to do. And yeah, but yeah, it is me, but it is also, you know, I don't do any of the development work. I have a team of web developers, and we're moving forward. And I am getting more people to help me with different tasks. Like I said, Rob Waring, well, he and I are going to be working together with the adding new books from independent authors. I'm not going to be involved in that. I do have somebody now who helps me process. When the publishers give me books, they give me a variety of files, sometimes InDesign, sometimes PDF, sometimes EPUB. So I now have a guy, a teacher, but he's looking for some extra work. He's helping me process those. He knows how to use InDesign and things like that. Yeah, so it is a lot of work. And the cheating thing, which you started, I think you were going to ask about. That took a lot of time.
So, okay. This interview has been in the working for a few months now, and I just went to PanSig, and I was just looking at titles to see what I wanted to go see, and I saw one title called Academic Dishonesty in Japan, A Cautionary Tale, and I thought, that sounds interesting, and I go, and oh, it's Paul Goldberg, and so it was a really interesting story. It was a good hour. It was not an hour, but it was a long story. So I'm hoping, can you give us like a 10-minute version of this story? I'm going to spotlight just you for this because it was really interesting. Probably the best thing I saw all week. So,
well, I mean, yes. So the background is we discovered that there was a student. We knew there were students selling answers to quizzes. And I know, as much as some students want to avoid reading, Japanese students are probably more reluctant to spend money. So I wasn't too concerned. We're trying to find out who's selling them, and we've done a very good job of shutting them down. But we later found out that someone was actually posting answers on YouTube for free. It wasn't a lot of books, but it was, it was very, that was kind of stressful. So we knew we could, I came with the decision we can either get in touch with YouTube and try to get them shut down, but I know where they are right now, and maybe I can catch them. If I get them shut down, they might pop up somewhere else where I haven't found them. So we decided to spend, it actually took about 2 months to track down the person. We eventually tricked them into revealing themselves. I had an assistant working with me. And after that, we had to analyze a lot of data to figure out who they were. We also realized we could figure out who had actually been watching the videos, because that person uploaded the quiz answers were not always correct. And sometimes they were oddly incorrect. And we could then find other students who had read those books pretty easily. And then we had to contact the teachers. What to me was most interesting was the response I got from teachers, and how some teachers handled it very well, and others I thought did not handle it so well. And that gave me the idea it might be useful to give a presentation on how teachers can best handle cheating. What I found most unsuccessful was going to the specific students who've been accused of cheating and saying, "We caught you cheating." And even with evidence, those students, and I have proof because I've had feedback from teachers, students who had evidence showing that they've been cheating still denied it. No, it was just a coincidence. We ran statistics that showed it was basically to have read a certain number of books, especially in that order with those quiz answers, was about 8 trillion to 1. But the students were still arguing, and students, they were doubling down. I'm going to bring my parents to school, and we're going to make a big stink, and then put teachers in a very uncomfortable position, especially over something as unimportant, I have to say, as extensive reading in their syllabus. On the other hand, teachers who were much more vague, and the more vague they were, the more successful they were, just said, we've just received a report, there's some cheating going on, we're going to investigate. If we catch you, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. However, we're going to give you the opportunity to confess. If you confess, you'll get in a little bit of trouble, but it'll be much, much less severe. And every teacher who did that found it to be tremendously successful. The biggest disappointment, if you saw my the presentation I gave with the other teacher, is that he had more students than he imagined admitting to cheating. But it was good. It was a good lesson for those students. It was a good lesson for the teacher to find other ways students were cheating. Like he had students cheating in ways that he or I never imagined, but they admitted it because they were scared, to get caught. In the end, only one of the accused students did not come forward, where he had 15 accused students, 14 of them came forward, and 5 students who were not on the list came forward, either because we didn't catch them or they cheated in other ways. And some of it was very innocent. One student said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I cheated. I read Anne of Green Gables because it was my favorite book as a kid, and I chose it from Xreading because I knew I would guess the answers right." That was her cheating. So not very severe. It was actually quite cute. But yeah, that was, it's not really an Xreading issue. It was more of a cheating issue, how to best deal with it. I think in Japan, we tend to think students don't cheat in Japan. Some teachers really, from the feedback I was getting, some teachers were really grateful, like, wow, I never knew my students were cheating before. And other teachers were actually combative. No, I know my students aren't cheating. So I think that's just a tendency in Japan. I do believe that for cultural reasons, Japanese students are less likely to cheat, or at least try not to get caught. Where other countries, when Robert introduced me, he said, I've taught in other places. I've taught in New York, where I have students from dozens of countries, and clearly there's some students from certain countries cheat at much higher rates. My guess is just because in that country, there's so much cheating going on in general, maybe we call it cheating or corruption, that that's how they feel they have to get by. It's just a natural thing they need to do. The system is corrupt against me, I'm going to cheat against the system. Where in Japan, that's generally not the attitude, and therefore I think cheating is maybe less common here, but it's certainly happening. And back to the Xreading, we are now actively trying to be proactive and monitor it when it's happening, and try to take action before it becomes a big issue like it did last fall. Robert, is that enough of the summary of my presentation?
Yeah. That was great. So that's about 85 minutes. If we want to get to questions and answers from the audience, unless I have some more questions to ask that I can kind of interlude with more questions if there's none from the audience. But I think, let's see, what did we do last time, Wayne and Chris? I think we had people raise their hand, and if you have a question, I'll try to call on you.
People still, oh wow, there's like 20 people watching.
Yeah, 20.
Yeah, we had people raise their hand, and then it goes to the top of the participants list, and you just choose that person going down.
Yeah, so
and we just make sure the person puts their hand down afterwards.
at the bottom of your screen, you should see something where it says reactions, and then there's a raise hand button. I think you have to be on the desktop version. I could be wrong about that, but so
yeah, you can do it. You can do it now through the app, but it's a bit cumbersome because it kind of erases the. You kind of go to another screen and you have to go back to another screen. You can still hear the audio. It's just that you kind of have to go through screens. I think it's a little more. It's definitely easier on the desktop, but it can be done. It can be done on a phone.
Kurt Ackerman has a question.
Well, Kurt's here. Oh no, I haven't replied to Kurt. After I said I replied to people, I have not replied to Kurt. Kurt, don't scold me.
I'm not going to scold you, Paul. No worries. Thanks. Sorry, I can't turn my camera on right now. That's a little bit rude, but I hope you don't mind. Can I just throw it into the chat as well? I typed up what I'd like to ask you. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah. Oh, we're not going to see you in your enterprise chair. You have the best Zoom background.
You can see me now?
No, I said we.
Oh, previous.
We can't see it. I love your
Goodness.
background.
Good, I'm glad. Okay, no, I think maybe I had mentioned it before when I contacted you about the possibility of having like access to vocabulary in the books. Like I teach a geography course, so content-based class, and I'd like to be able to recommend readers. Trina gave me a list of some of the National Geographic series that were pretty good, but like to match up the vocabulary that I use in geography with graded readers that touch on similar subjects. And that way, because my second year students, I teach at a junior college. Sorry, I teach at Hokusei in Sapporo, a junior college. And my second year students have to take extensive reading, and they can choose to take content-based classes. Mine is geography. So if they read the graded readers, it helps them understand the geography concepts better, and they also get credit for the words in extensive reading. And I'd like to also be able to match that up with other content-based classes, like Matt Cotter teaches. Also, I'm a colleague of Matt, so he teaches some as well. And just being able to get the students to read the books that will give them, well, two birds with one stone type of thing. Thank you. Is that okay?
So what exactly was the question? I'm sorry.
Okay, well, some way to, like in the search of Xreading, to be able to say, put in the expression climate change and have books that touch on climate change come up, and then the students could say choose ones that were within their level range or ones that seem interesting to them, whatever. And by reading those, they would get deeper insight into geography, as well as getting the word count in extensive reading.
Okay, so are you talking about the words in the books or just the topic? Okay, so one thing we're working, I started on it actually a couple of years ago, we had to leave it, is just a lot of like your typical vocabulary analytical tools, like how frequent words show up in books, how many times you'd have to, yeah, things like that. So Kurt, we're kind of working on something like that, although it's more for researchers, but I can't see any reason why it couldn't be used for the purpose that you're suggesting.
Even if for me, if I could do the search and find some books and then I could recommend them to the students. I've done that with a few of the National Geographic ones, but I'm sure there are many others. I don't have time to read all of the books and find ones as much as I'd like to.
Yeah, so that I think those tools will help you. I said they were primarily for analyzing vocabulary for vocabulary researchers, but I think they could easily be used for the purposes you're mentioning right now.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul.
Okay, thanks for the question. I'm sorry I didn't reply to your email sooner.
So now you don't have to reply to me. Thanks.
Okay.
Wayne Malcolm put a question in, but I didn't get a chance to get to it. Do you want me to read it, Wayne, or do you want to read it?
Oh, you can read it.
All right. So Wayne Malcolm, he asked this question in the sign up sheet. What is the international footprint of Xreading? And with travel being extremely limited, what challenges have there been with gaining clients in foreign countries and maintaining those relationships?
Yeah,
Oh,
I asked that question. I asked that question because of the time we ran into each other in Cambodia.
Oh, that's right.
You're talking about you came down to see your developers and such, and then that's when I kind of it clicked that like, oh, he's really trying to blanket the world, take over the world.
The biggest challenge is Xreading will become popular in general where extensive reading is popular. And that's really the challenge, is because extensive reading is, people look to Japan because it's so common here. Obviously, not every university is doing it. They should. But there's still a lot that aren't. But compared to other places, for example, Thailand right now is a great example. Professor Willie Renandia, who's another advisor on Xreading, he is very well respected in Southeast Asia, in particular Thailand. He is a guest lecturer at one of the very top universities. He invited me to come there to present with him. He was presenting on the importance and necessity of extensive reading. The teachers there heard about it, and I should say they believed him, but didn't have a way that their library. It's a big university, maybe 20,000-30,000 students, and they had about 200 graded readers. So implementing extensive reading program wasn't possible, even if they wanted to. But when they heard about Xreading, because of Willie introducing me to them, they implemented a program, and it's been very successful. In fact, the teacher who's been managing it was very, very satisfied, and is now taking an extremely active role in promoting extensive reading all around Thailand. So it really takes, you have to find people who believe in extensive reading for the most part. The second part is I need to have a trustworthy distributor. And luckily in Thailand, I was able to find one, somebody who's actually well known around the world. So people in Japan could recommend this person, and he's been fantastic. working with the universities. But that's been the most difficult thing. My most recent development is in Ecuador, although it's a distributor who really want to sell an online system. He got in touch with me, although I've recently discovered he has no idea what extensive reading is. It's all intensive reading. So they're asking me, where are all the activities? You have these great books, but where are all all the activities? And I have to tell them, I'm sorry, that's we plan to add them, but that's not what extensive reading is generally about, and therefore we've not emphasized it. Does that answer your question, Malcolm?
Yep, definitely.
Okay, thanks.
Nice.
No one's raising their hand, but I do have more audience questions that were submitted. We have two Chris's. I don't know which Chris asked this. It could be a third one. How do you implement a graded reader program into a school where other teachers view translation as a better teaching style? So I guess, like, how do you talk them into using graded readers?
Yeah, that's a challenge. That's not really related to Xreading as much as it is extensive reading. One is, how does any teacher, promote their agenda? It's more of a personality thing. I think in terms of, just extensive reading in general, there's so much research. If you go to the ER Foundation website, they have a section on like the best research, or the research that makes the strongest argument for extensive reading. The argument I think I mentioned earlier, I think just the tennis analogy. How can you expect people to become good at tennis if you don't give them a chance to play? As much as you teach them the skills, they're not going to become a good tennis player unless you give them time to use those skills. And they're not going to use them in school. They're not going to read unless they're rewarded with grades for doing the reading. But definitely a challenge for many teachers. The other thing, though, is that's one reason from a business perspective, not from an ER perspective. That's why we're trying to add more features to Xreading. So, for example, the teacher who believes extensive reading is really good, but some of his colleagues don't, but his colleagues think speed reading can have really good impact, we're adding a speed reading component. Vocabulary, that's a big reason to add our vocabulary learning component, because yes, students can tap on a word and get the meaning, and we can help them learn their vocabulary words for that book. But that vocabulary component could also be used as a standalone vocabulary learning tool. And again, you might persuade those teachers who are not so keen on extensive reading, but like vocabulary. Yes, Xreading has vocabulary and also has the extensive reading part. And unfortunately, we may actually add intensive reading passages like TOEFL or TOEIC, again, for that, that one colleague who's dead set against extensive reading, but would be willing to accept it if there's intensive reading. Yeah, good question.
Jackie has her hand up.
Hey, Jackie.
Hello. Hello again. I had a question about levels and the fact that you have M-Reader quizzes in Xreading, but the two systems are on different levels. M-Reader runs on the Kyoto scale and you're on ERF. Do they match up pretty closely?
So at the first 9 levels, I think they're almost identical. They say starter, we say 1, but the levels are pretty much in lockstep. It's only at the higher levels that we follow the ER Foundation and went up to 15, which now goes up to 20. Where the Kyoto one pretty much stops at 9. And so everything that on the ER Foundation is like from like 14 to 20 is actually level 9 in Kyoto. But all the others are very easy. So we actually just did this a few months ago. We mapped all the Kyoto books to the Xreading level. So at the lower levels, it was very easy. A starter level Kyoto became an Xreading level 1. Kyoto 1 became Xreading level 2. It was only when we got to level, I think, 7 of Kyoto that we ran into a little bit of trouble. And what we did was, so a level 7 in Kyoto is basically the same as, I think, 10 and 11 in Xreading. So what do? We weren't sure. We had a bunch of ideas. In the end, we just took, okay, all these books at Kyoto level 7, we're going to split them in half. We're going to find out how many words are in every book, put them in order, from the shortest book to the longest book. The middle point, we're going to cut them in half. Everything down here we'll put into level, I said at level 10, and everything up here will go into Xreading level 11. That was about the best answer, because in Xreading, one of our plans is we're going to analyze the text of every book. Rob is helping with that, and Stuart McLean is helping me with that. We're going to analyze the text and put it in the level it really belongs. That was the issue with Dorothy Zemak. She pointed out that we really need that. However, for the M-Reader books, we don't have that ability because we don't have the text.
Right.
So for those, you have to estimate.
Right. I guess, yeah, one thing I was thinking is that if they can read a physical book or read it on Xreading, and the level is different based on if it's a paper or digital.
So they will, if they're using Xreading, they will see the Xreading level that we've assigned to it based on the M-Reader level. So there's no problem.
I see. Okay, right. Cheers. Cheers, Paul. Thank you.
Sure. Other questions?
I know no one has their hand up, but I know people want to ask this, and how do I put this? If I want to write a graded reader, let me start over. If when I got it, the whole idea I started about this is I wanted to get into the graded reader industry, but I wanted to learn more about it. And what's better than talking to people in the industry? And I've talked to you, and I've talked to Matt and Rob and Andy Boone and other people, and I get a lot of different answers. So ranging from don't even try to get into the industry to, oh, well, we're actually looking for new writers. So if someone were to come up to you and say, hey, how do I get into this industry, or I want to write a book, what would your answer be?
Answer is very simple, is please get in touch with me in a couple of months, because we will be inviting independent authors to write books for graded readers, and we'll put them in Xreading, and the person will get royalties just like the publishers do, although I will say at a slightly lower rate. However, I also, a caveat is I've been saying that for about a year and a half now. It's taking a little bit longer. We need to build the infrastructure to enable teachers to be able to give their books and their ideas, and not only the physical or digital infrastructure of how to upload the book, how to upload the cover image, how to upload the quiz, but also we want to give guidance on how to write a better graded reader, and possibly editing content that's given to us. Because at the end of the day, I'm not going to put something really bad in Xreading.
Sure.
From the big publishers, I might have to, because they say it's all or nothing.
Right.
But from independent author, we're going to be a little bit more selective. And that's what I'm working with Rob Waring, because there's nobody who has more experience editing graded readers than Rob.
So would this be like an in-house publisher, or are you so it'd be an Xreading publishing company or something?
Yep, exactly. That was not my original plan. My original plan is the teacher would be the publisher, and we'll just sell it for them, sell it through Xreading. But we realized there would be advantages for us being the publisher. For one thing, is we could submit it to the Extensive Reading Foundation has an award every year for the best graded readers, and it has to come from a publisher. So one advantage is if people give us their books, we can then submit it. But unlike a regular publisher, we would give authors the opportunity after some amount of time, if they want to take their book out of Xreading. Like I don't think the author of a Penguin Reader can then say, I want my book back. So with Xreading, we would probably have a clause that allows teachers to take their book back after a certain amount of time.
Yeah, I believe you sell, talking to Andy Boone, I think you sell the rights to your book to that publisher. So yeah, it's theirs.
Yeah, and that's important because there's some Cambridge English readers, we have a very good relationship with Cambridge, but we don't have all of their readers. The reason is their contracts from the 1990s specify that they need to get permission from the author before they can do certain things with it. And some of those authors they can't find, or have died and they don't know who the next of kin is, and they can't put those books on Xreading. There's a few books that some people said, why don't you put this Cambridge book? You have all the other ones. Why is this one missing? It's because Cambridge can't get in touch with the author. Or in some cases, the author said no. but more likely the author has not been found.
So I think Matt Cotter just got he was here earlier but had to leave. He just got his first couple books published. I believe it was a rather long journey. Are you kind of expecting that same time period? I mean, I believe like years. It took years of concept, editing, refinement to.
Yep. So his book is a series that Trina Takeuchi and Ann Maeda came up with, these socially conscious graded readers.
Right.
And they told me about the idea. We met in the World Congress in Dubai, which was about 5 or 6 years ago, and they come up with the idea. And it actually took 5. Matt came on a little bit later. They realized that they needed a couple more authors. It's taken years. Part of that is because they've been working with a publisher who is very cares a lot about detail. I mean, this publisher wanted to make sure the books were perfect when they came out, and they are great. You know, it's from Abax.
Yeah.
They have 3 in printed. They have 3 books, but in Xreading, those 3 books are actually separated. Each book is separated into 3 stories,
right,
which is what the authors originally intended. But the publisher really wanted to make sure everything was done well. The advantage of digital is that if you screw something up, you can always fix it later on, for the most part. You know, you don't, if you realize that, you know, there's typos, well, we just go in and fix it. It's not like you printed 10,000 books and you're stuck with those typos.
Right.
You decide, oh, you know, that cover isn't really getting the reaction from people that we thought it would. Well, just change the cover image. It takes 5 minutes. So I think the reason it took so long is that that publisher, who was a small publisher and limited resources, wanted to make sure the books were as perfect as possible. With the digital system, you try to make them as good as possible, of course, but you can always come back and change something if you want to.
So with the Xreading publishing, do you have a theme that you're looking for, or a level, or do you want nonfiction, fiction? So if anybody here wants to, you know, submit ideas to you, is there something that you're, you know, in your mind, like, that you're thinking that you want to add? Like, I know a lot of people want more low-level books.
Yep.
And I remember Matt talking about, like, they wanted his book lower, and he's like, no, like level 3 or whatever is as low as I want to go. I can't get these ideas across using lower vocabulary. So do you kind of have anything like that in your mind yet, or you just want to get ideas and then take it from there?
So a couple of things. First of all, we just want to have anybody who has a good story and can write it that's accessible for students, whatever the level, we'll just put the book at that level. So when when Rob created the Cengage page turner series, it was 12 levels, and he needed a certain number of books at each level, and authors had to write to that level.
Right.
It was a structured system. With Xreading, we'll take a book and we'll put it wherever it belongs.
Famous.
As your story with Matt is, many teachers say we want more low-level graded readers, and then when they realize how difficult it is and how challenging it is to actually write an engaging story, the solution is more images. But images are actually the most difficult and expensive part of a graded reader. Getting, you know, decent images could be very, very expensive. I think Rob told me that for the Cengage Foundation series, the colored ones about the high school students, it was like $250,000 just for the artwork. Yeah, for 42 books.
Wow.
Which is why publishers aren't making a lot of graded readers, because they're not going to make the money back. It's not like a textbook that they can then sell, you know, every year to a whole new group of students.
So how do you see the future of extensive reading? I mean, do you see more competitors for Xreading? Do you see like the publication of books slowing down? So you're kind of on a side of the industry that most people aren't. So what do you see as the future?
What I'm hoping for, this is kind of my future plans, non-technical. This is what I'm hoping will happen. Is number one, I think we need more graded readers for specific majors. So Rob right now is working on a series of graded readers specifically for business majors. That's great, because hopefully it'll get students. And when I say business majors, these are like, think of it like, or medical. We also have one for medical students. Think of it like, ER or Grey's Anatomy. It's
Sure.
stories that take place in a medical environment or not, a hospital, but could be enjoyed by everybody, but will probably be most appreciated by medical students or business students. So I think we really need to have more series of graded readers. It's great to have the classics, but back to the question before, how do you get your colleagues to implement extensive reading? Well, if you're teaching in a business department and you can say, hey, this is extensive reading and it's thousands of books, but there are 50 books that are really perfect for our business majors, it'll be easier for that teacher to get their students to agree to an extensive reading program. So I think that's one thing we need is more major specifics. And we're going to, besides trying to find independent authors who want to submit their favorite graded reader that they've written, we're going to be probably getting authors to write 2 specific series. Like business, nursing, things like that.
At Pansig, I met Philip Rickenbono, I think is his name, and he just started a publishing company, and they only do sports English.
Good. I know Phil, but I have to get in touch with him.
He just published a textbook, and it's baseball English, and I like that's fantastic. So, like, I think it's that kind of specificity that you're talking about.
Yeah, as long as the stories can still be appealing to anybody, I think it will make them most successful. In fact, it was actually maybe 6 or 7 years ago that someone came up to me with the idea of sports graded readers. They were going to do it, and then they disappeared. It wasn't Philip, it was UK. But that's even long before I thought of these business readers. The other big project I'm working on is I found a lot of teachers who say, you know what, I love extensive reading. I think it would be great for my students, but my library doesn't have enough graded readers, and I can't use Xreading because the university here limits 1 textbook per class, and there's a certain price. In Japan, I think most people here are based in Japan. It might be 3,000 yen, $30 for class materials. They're buying that textbook.
Right.
And therefore we can't really do extensive reading as much as I want to. And teachers say, the alternative is I could do without the textbook and do Xreading, but then I, as a teacher, I have to create an entire syllabus. How am I, I have to create every lesson, I have to create all the activities and everything. So one idea I've had, and I'm actually just starting now working with some other teachers, is creating an extensive reading textbook. It would be a tradition, as much as possible, a traditional 4 skills textbook, the kind of things teachers are accustomed to working with. But instead of having a 1-page story, like most textbooks, I think, have like a 1-page text and then activities and things related to that text, and maybe a shorter text later on. Instead, it would be a graded reader they would have to read through Xreading, and then they could do activities and vocabulary related to that book. So in other words,
a blended extensive reading.
Yes. Yeah, and then, and some people say, well, that's not extensive reading because you're telling students which book they have to read. I would suggest that each chapter has like an open-ended reading part. So students aren't reading just 1 graded reader, they're reading 1 that's connected to the activities of that unit. But then there's maybe 24 other graded readers that they're encouraged to choose 1 of for some other kind of activities that are more open-ended, not related to 1 specific book.
And no one's saying you can't mix extensive and intensive reading. Like, it doesn't have to be black and white. Yeah, that's interesting.
And I think that would just make it a lot easier for the teacher who wants to integrate extensive reading, but also feels they need a textbook to give them their class the structure, and that they as a teacher and their students are expecting. So that's what that might be more of the future of extensive reading, at least to making it more mainstream.
Have you ever thought about adapting like comics or manga to graded reading format? Is it possible, or has anybody done it? I've never seen them.
Sure. There's a series from eFuture, Magic Adventures, I think it's called, and they're very good. I think they've won some awards. For Xreading, though, that is my nightmare, because so when you digitize a book, you have 2 options: fixed image, which is like a PDF, or adaptive text, which is like a website. So with fixed image, everything stays exactly in the same position. Like a PDF, you can make it bigger or smaller, okay? But you can't change the words on a line. Adaptive text, if you make the print bigger, you get less words on a line. So when I created Xreading, I had to choose one or the other. You can't have both. So we decided, since most students would be reading on their smartphone, you'd want something where they could increase the text size. So we went with adaptive text. The problem with adaptive text system, it doesn't work with a fixed image, and manga comics require text and images to be in a fixed position. So that's one reason we have not added any books like that. Now, we may in the future, as Xreading gets bigger and I have the resources, I may create like a second kind of reader to deal specifically with manga style books.
Because I mean, like you were talking about specific topics, manga, there's a manga for everything in Japan. If somebody likes something, they have a manga for it. And then if you could do an English version of that. How come, sorry, last question, then it's probably time. Why hasn't companies like Scholastic made graded readers of their books?
Because, and that's why Xreading has been able to succeed, is ultimately it's a very small market for them. It's too small so what we're doing is the ELT market.
Right.
So for example, I forget, like with Pearson, we've come close to adding their books, but Pearson Penguin, they have lots of famous books. For example, I think many people know, because they're famous in Japan, the Who Is and Who Was series. They're really well done biographies, but who are published by Pearson. But Pearson's told me these are called trade publications. In other words, we sell these in the bookstore to the general public, and we make a lot of money. And we will never license those to you unless you're willing to pay $1 million.
Oh, wow.
Not necessarily for those books, but in general. So whenever I get feedback from students, I generally don't get feedback from students too much. Usually I'm more interested in what teachers have to say, but whenever I get feedback from students, like the first thing I always get is, why don't you add Harry Potter? Why don't you add Stars in Our Sky? Or there's some very popular book like that. And it's the same reason that the publishers would want a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah.
Where
she's a billionaire for a reason, like rolling, right?
Yeah. So that would be that's why I think most publishers have not really gotten involved. They just know it's not a lot of money, which in some ways is good for me, because that's how I've been able to survive. I'm sure if Amazon or somebody else wanted to make something like Xreading, they could do it, with their unlimited resources. They could do something really good. I don't think they would have students' best interest in mind as much as I do, and teachers do, but technically they could build something really good.
Excellent. All right, well, that's about 2 hours. So I want to say thank you very much for this interview, and thank you everybody for coming.